It's funny. Growing up, I never thought of Psycho as a franchise, but I guess, I mean, it really is. I mean, despite it being a literal trilogy, I don't think that a lot of people really look at it that way. And you might be surprised to learn that I only just watched Psycho last year for like the first time ever. That's a mystery that I'll never understand, even myself. But I watched it, and honestly, it kind of blew my mind. And I've seen some recent love for the Psycho sequels lately here on YouTube, and I gotta say, it really intrigued me. And for the people that don't like the fact that there are Psycho sequels, and I do get that, but Robert Bloch wrote three Psycho novels, I mean, so you can't say that it's unwarranted. And you might think that this is weird that I'm doing this review despite not even having yet seen Psycho 2. And I'll get to it eventually. And I will say, I wouldn't recommend watching part 3 before part 2. I mean, it is a direct continuation, so I did have to like look some stuff up in the middle of watching it. And I mean, it wasn't like a huge mess or anything. It wasn't hard to do, hard to figure out, hard to piece together, but still, watch them in order. Don't be an idiot like me. Directed by Norman Bates actor Anthony Perkins himself, Psycho 3 takes place just 1 month after Psycho 2. So like I said, pretty much a direct continuation. By the way, if you've ever read any of the Robert Bloch novels, let me know how they are, because I'm like super curious. He was an acquaintance of H.P. Lovecraft, who is my favorite writer of all time. He was younger than Lovecraft. He was like a teenager when he first reached out to him, and Lovecraft became kind of like his mentor to an extent and gave him like writing advice. They corresponded quite a bit, but never met in person. So, Psycho 3 came out in 1986, 3 years after Part 2, which was 23 years after the original. I mean, clearly Alfred Hitchcock must have had no interest in doing these Psycho sequels, and I can't help to think that someone wanted to cash in at the right time, since the 80s was, you know, the decade of the slasher. And it worked. I mean, Psycho 2 brought in over $34 million in box office sales off a $5 million budget. Psycho 3 was not a financial failure necessarily, but much less successful, bringing in $14 million off an $8 million budget. It was the least successful of the trilogy. I assume by 1986, I think people just must not have really cared enough to see this. I don't know why it brought in so much less than Part 2, but is what it is, I guess. Side note, as of the time of writing this review, I learned that there was a Psycho 4 from back in 1990, which I had no idea even existed. It was a direct-to-TV film and was directed by Mick Garris, and of course, we had the infamous 1998 Gus Van Sant directed remake. Oh, and I also haven't seen the Bates Motel TV series, but I've heard really good things. So I will get to all this stuff eventually when I have time. And I know this review is all over the place, and I'm sure most people prefer reviews that, you know, get to the point rather quickly, but I guess that isn't my thing. One of the first things I noticed about Psycho 3 is that Anthony Perkins did a really good job here as a director. I mean, I'm no expert. I don't know anything about filmmaking, but I think he did a good job. You know, this was his first time, and he only directed one other film, oddly enough. Directing is not for everyone, from what I've heard, but I genuinely thought he did a good job, and I definitely imagine that he took it very seriously. And Norman Bates is an interesting character, to say the least. You know, he was arguably the first slasher villain, and what sets him apart from all the others is that it's hard to actually consider him a villain. He does things that are obviously terrible, but you always feel bad for him. And I think that we have to give a lot of credit for, you know, that to Anthony Perkins for his portrayal of Norman. I mean, it's obviously not his fault for being the way he is. He's a product of childhood trauma and abuse. I mean, he's such a sweet, likable guy, but, you know, one with a monster that lives inside of him. As usual, he's still, you know, the lonely hotel owner. He offers a job to Duke, a sleazy, womanizing drifter played by a young Jeff Fahey. You also have Maureen, a depressed and suicidal nun who left the church and doesn't know where to go. And then you have Tracy Venable, a journalist looking to make a name for herself by investigating Norman. And that is pretty much it for the main characters. I love how everyone that enters Norman's life are because of the Bates Motel. It's almost like The motel is almost like a character of its own at this point. Overall, I liked Psycho 3 quite a bit, and I know it's weird that I skipped part 2, but I feel more motivated to watch it now. I mean, it's not a masterpiece like the first Psycho, but worth watching if you're a fan of that, or even just a slasher fan in general. It might not have the high body count or super gory creative kills, but it makes up for that with interesting characters. The ending kind of ties everything together, as I assume they did in the book series, but I could be wrong. It's a tense, climactic ending, and I like what they did with it. I'm going to give Psycho 3 a 6 out of 10, and I also wanted to recommend the excellent work of Oz Perkins, the son of Anthony. He's directed a handful of things, but among his work, from what I've seen, he directed Gretel and Hansel in 2020, which was very, very good, and The Blackcoat's Daughter from 2015, which was fucking amazing. One of my favorite horror movies of the last, over the last 10 years probably. Don't let the mediocre IMDb scores fool you. Cheers, guys.